Evelina mai kako, and welcome to the Hawaiian Kingdom podcast. Evelina mai kako, and welcome to the Hawaiian Kingdom podcast.
Aloha mai kako, Evelina mai to the Hawaiian Kingdom podcast. Kalākaua ko inoa. My name is Kalākaua, and today we have a wonderful guest today, and I'm honored to welcome Dr. Lorenz Gonschor, political scientist, historian, and author of the groundbreaking book, A Power in the World, the Hawaiian Kingdom in Oceania. Dr. Gonschor's work challenges us to view the Hawaiian Kingdom not as an isolated island nation, but as an active and influential power within a larger Polynesian and Pacific world. His research explores Hawaiian diplomacy, constitutional government, international recognition, and the relationships that connected Hawaii with Pacific nations such as Tonga, Samoa, Tahiti, and Fiji. For many people, Hawaii's story is often told through an American lens. Dr. Gonschor invites us to look at Hawaii through a different window, one that reveals a vibrant network of Aboriginal Pacific nations engaging one with another as equals, exchanging ideas, diplomacy, and visions of sovereignty. Today, we'll discuss Hawaiian influence throughout Oceania, the remarkable legacy of Charles St. Julian, the constitutional development of Pacific kingdoms, the unique experiences of Tonga and Fiji, and how the continued existence of the Hawaiian Kingdom is understood across the broader Pacific. Dr. Gonschor, mahalo for joining us.
Mahalo kalau, aloha mai kako. Thank you so much for having me today. And by the way, I really commend you for your introduction, because this is actually a better back cover text than what is actually the back cover text on the book. I mean, I wish what you just read would actually be on the back cover, because that's better than what's, I mean, I'm not saying it's bad what's on that book, but I think you said it even better than the back cover text on my book. So wonderful. Thank you for that.
Now, is there anything I might have missed in the introduction that you'd want to...
Well, maybe just the fact what I'm currently doing, because some people have known me and then I kind of disappeared from Hawaii and haven't really followed up. So many of you may know me as, as being a doctoral student at UH, and I'm obviously I'm close to a lot of other scholars that have worked on the Hawaiian Kingdom. And then, so I finished my PhD in 2016, so it was 10 years ago. And then in the last 10 years, I've been mainly off Hawaii. So I first worked in Tonga for a while, for a few years at University. We can get to that maybe at one point. And then also in Tahiti in the University of French Polynesia for another 3 years. And then recently, since the last 3 years, since 2023, I've been a senior lecturer, which is like the British Commonwealth equivalent of an assistant professor in politics and international affairs at the University of the South Pacific in Fiji. So I'm based in Suva in Fiji now. So just so that you know, like where I'm situated and what I'm doing right now.
That's fantastic. That is awesome. So we had a former guest, a Harvard graduate, Umi Perkins, and he specifically, I asked him, if there's any question you would want to pass across the Pacific Ocean, and he specifically wanted to hear your thoughts on Charles St. Julian. So let's go ahead and begin the show with this question. That way he doesn't have to watch the whole podcast. We can mahalo his time from the last podcast by asking this first. So who was Charles St. Julian, and why do you believe his role has been overlooked in both Hawaiian and Pacific historiography?
Yeah, thank you very much. That comes pretty much goes to the core of my dissertation research, and also like I did another follow-up article in the Hawaiian Journal of History, and so the book was in 2019, and then I have another article in the Hawaiian Journal of History. I think it was 2021. So that looks into more of the personal, like the biography of Saint Julian and like his kind of group of kind of his circle of friends and supporters, and their role in Hawaiian Kingdom diplomacy. So I guess to make it very short, and it's always hard to present your own main research in a nutshell, but I'm trying to do that, not to talk forever about it. St. Julian he was not ethnically Hawaiian. That's an important fact. He actually never even set foot on Hawaii, yet he played an important role for the Hawaiian Kingdom. So he was a British, I think a French descendant British because Saint-Julien, like his name is actually more French than English originally. So he was a British-born journalist who came to Australia in the, like many other of the British settlers in the early 19th century. And so he kind of was a court reporter, and journalists went into this court reports and stuff like that in Sydney. And then he got interested in the Pacific, in the various island nations, and I guess maybe first from more of a commercial point of view, how can British traders make business there and whatever. So he did come from this kind of British settler kind of perspective originally. But then once he studied more and more about that, he found out about the Hawaiian Kingdom as being this amazing power, more distant from Australia than some of the other islands, but kind of a really progressive state. And he was beginning to admire Hawaiian Kingdom, and was really was fascinated by what he read about it, and then he published a book about it. And then based on that, he actually then asked, because he noticed there was no efficient, or there was some other British businessman in Sydney who was the Hawaiian honorary consul, but that guy didn't really do anything. He was just there like many other people who were just they wanted to have another feather in their cap, so they added that honorary consulship and already being the consul for, I don't know, Brazil and Costa Rica and other things. And, so it wasn't really many of the people who, to be honest, many people who took up Hawaiian consular responsibilities were not really that much committed to it. But St. Julian kind of wrote King Kamehameha III and said, I'm really interested in what you guys are doing. I can help you make connections with people in Australia, but also make connections with other parts of the Pacific. And so Kamehameha the third then did appoint him as I think first consul, but then eventually it was upgraded. He became essentially what today would be an ambassador, like a kind of higher level of diplomatic representative and representation. And he ended up in various stages to be eventually the highest Hawaiian diplomat for, first of all the Australian colonies, right? Australia did not exist as a nation at that time, right? It was a collection of British colonies, 6 different British colonies on the Australian continent. So he was the kind of head of Hawaiian diplomacy for all of the Australian colonies, and also the ambassador to all the other Pacific islands. So that was kind of, or they used the term commissioner. They didn't really use the word ambassador at that time. So, but that would be the modern equivalent. So in that position, he was really the one who essentially worked with the Hawaiian government, particularly with Foreign Minister Wiley, to develop a vision of Hawaii becoming I guess, well, maybe the other way around. So his idea, he moved away from this idea of being just a British settler interested in commerce, which I think was his kind of starting angle. But then he kind of moved from that position towards one where he actually very explicitly was a defender of indigenous sovereignty in the Pacific, or of the kind of helping all these different people, and actually saying, well, they should all become kind of strong, independent states. They should all model themselves on the Hawaiian Kingdom, and then they should form some kind of confederation so that there could really be a kind of a Pacific power that would be independent of everybody else. And then, of course, also they could have good and positive trade relations with the United Kingdom. That was kind of the afterthought of it. But definitely kind of pushing this idea of Hawaii-led pan-Pacific or pan-Polynesian confederation, essentially. So that's where the title for my book, A Power in the World, that is actually a quote from him, because in one of the correspondences with Foreign Minister Wiley, he was saying, so if we succeed in developing strong states and then federating them all into one kind of big confederation under Hawaiian leadership, then this pan-Pacific entity will be and then I quote, power in the world, not only in the formal but in the actual sense. So that is the quote by Excellency Charles St. Julian. And then from that kind of and then he what he did then is he appointed other people he trusted to be specific representatives in all these different, first of all in the other Australian colonies, but then also in the different islands in the South Pacific. He appointed the first Hawaiian consul in Samoa, in Tonga. No, Samoa had one before, sorry, but in Tonga he appointed the first one. In Fiji he appointed the first one. In Samoa he appointed another one. So he was really the one, and the ones in New Zealand as well. He was part of he was really the one, the kind of the center point or the hub, so to say. His office, the Hawaiian office in Sydney, was kind of the hub for like coordinating these kind of Hawaiian activities in the southern Pacific. So yeah, that's pretty much him in a nutshell. Now he ended up then actually moving to the insular Pacific, but not to Hawaii, because he was sent to Fiji as Hawaii's special commissioner to make that connection with the Fijian Kingdom in 1871, commissioned specifically by Kamehameha V to do that. And then he ended up staying in Fiji because he had some experience with law and they were short of lawyers, even though he wasn't formally a lawyer, but he had a lot of experience because of his court reporting in Sydney. And then he ended up becoming the Chief Justice of the Kingdom of Fiji. He was actually the second in command. King Dokonbao appointed him to the position of Chief Justice, and that's where he ended his life in Fiji. And then after the British took over Fiji in 1874, the British essentially kicked him out because he didn't have a formal law license under the British system. So in the British colonial system, he could not continue that job. And then he passed away, kind of brokenheartedly, I guess, in a way, in Fiji in 1874. And there's kind of know where his grave is, but I'm still working with like descendants and other people to try to locate his tomb, and potentially at one point, we'll have some kind of ceremony and create a proper tombstone, and hopefully there can be some arrangement between his family, the Hawaiian Kingdom people, and others to celebrate him and honor him, maybe by building a new tombstone, because I think the old one has kind of this, it's hard to find, but some people know where it is anyway. So that's one of my long-term projects, to get like a proper protocol to honor him here in Fiji.
That is incredible. Incredible. Now, my viewers, if this is your first time tuning in, I'm only part Kanaka, so I'm Hapa. I'm considered a Kupa Hapa, part Hawaiian subject. But because of that, it actually kind of helps out with the show because I'm mostly Scottish, so I have really hairy arms. So you'll see me do this a couple times to show the viewers the goosebump moments. But I wanted to share something with the viewers that I've been working on, and it's kind of honestly along the same lines in a way with Charles St. Julian, and let me explain. So I live in Reno, Nevada, right? And out in Reno, Nevada, I found out that David L. Gregg, I think he was a foreign minister of the United States, and he ends up working as the Minister of Finance for Kamehameha III, right? So he's employed by the Hawaiian Kingdom, right? He's kind of like John L. Stevens in a way, but when they try to bribe him to overthrow right, he doesn't take the bribes, right? So they're bribing early. And he has a lot of integrity. In fact, if you Google his name, even Wikipedia says that. It was really interesting because Wikipedia says David L. Gregg said that annexing Hawaii by a treaty would also be unconstitutional. It's like one of the first sentences in Wikipedia, which is really interesting. And he served as a judge. I think he served as a governor in Carson City. He comes to Carson in 1862. Because I think they were trying to figure out how to constitutionally acquire the Hawaiian Kingdom or the Hawaiian Islands. But because of his like international diplomacy and working with, this power in Oceania, he gets all this experience. And then 2 years later, Nevada becomes a state on October 31st on Halloween, 1864. Which is kind of interesting. But he would have been a part of the sphere of influence of creating a state in the United States, but he was trained in the Hawaiian Kingdom. I actually did find his grave, so I found his gravestone, and it was completely shattered. So I had to like put the pieces together and put 2 Hawaiian flags on it with the Koi petitions, and I cleaned out all the weeds and all of that. So it's kind of interesting because, we don't really think of Hawaii as a power in the world, but yet here we are, helping with the formation of a state in the Union, all the way in Reno, and then all the way in Fiji. Here's St. Julian, right? So I wish you luck on finding his gravestone. I'd love to send like a little hi Hawaii from me to put it if you find him, to honor him there. So, a lot of people don't understand, who this St. Julian is. Now we know why the title of your book is the title of your book, which is really interesting. are there any other like details you want to share about his work throughout the Pacific and how it
Yes.
shaped like diplomatic thinking among Polynesian Pacific governments?
Yes, definitely. So that was more like his kind of his biography in a nutshell. Now, like some of the concrete actions that he did was that he was kind of advising. He was advising the different kind of these burgeoning kingdoms in the Pacific, and and then he was kind of advising them to, for example, sending them copies of the Hawaiian Constitution. Right. Obviously, this was the time before the internet. This was the time before even modern postal services and all of that. So it was kind of no radio, none of that, like no telegraph cables and all of that. So it was kind of not as easy to get information as it is today. So he was kind of in correspondence. Obviously, there's a huge correspondence with Wiley in the Hawaii State Archives, like hundreds of pages. Like they wrote each other a letter almost every week, pretty much. Now it's for those of you who have worked on that history, one half of this is easy to read. Like St. Julian has a really nice handwriting. Unfortunately, Wiley has the most horrible handwriting of anybody in the 19th century I've ever seen. Like this guy is in the mid, he's a Victorian guy, and he writes like a 20th century doctor, right? That's how he writes. So like what I mean. So it's very hard to get to read that part of the correspondence, unfortunately.
That's funny.
But yeah, no, really, like I honestly, I have not. I mean, he looks like he's out of his time. Like I said, like I've never seen a Victorian gentleman like write in such an ugly and horrible way. Like it's just incredible. Anyway, which doesn't. I don't mean this to put down his personality. He was a great patriot of the Hawaiian Kingdom, but I mean, just like I wish for posterity he had like a little bit more careful about his handwriting. Anyway, but that left aside. There's I don't know, hundreds of pages of correspondence in the Hawaiian archives. There's also some of the other correspondence in the archives in Sydney, and like his family papers are in Sydney mainly, including the first Hawaiian Royal Order that he created. That was the first Hawaiian Royal Order was created by him and sent it to by Kamehameha IV. Because people always assume that the Order of Kamehameha, the Royal Order of Kamehameha, the one that Kamehameha V created in order to honor his grandfather, right? That one of 1865, the one that that's obviously the biggest, like the big national order, of which the Grand Cross on color is like the highest honor that the Hawaiian Kingdom had, right? So that is obviously the one that's the more famous one, and that is the one that became kind of the highest ranking in that system of ranks. But the actually historically, like chronologically, oldest Hawaiian Royal Order is the Order of Arosi that St. Julian created in 60 or was it 58 or something? I don't get me on the exact years here, but
so Kamehameha the third, right?
The fourth. That was the fourth.
Okay.
It was like late 50s, like 50, 59, 60, like around that time.
50s. Okay.
Yeah, or like 90. I think it was actually 1860 that it was the royal assent, like when the Privy Council said, like they was like Wiley was saying, oh, by the way, my diplomat in Sydney created this royal order. Are your Majesty, do you approve of that? And then the king assented to it. Yes, I approve this as being with the order of my kingdom. And that happened, I think, in the fourth. Yeah, I think that was in 60 or 61. Like things obviously took a long time at that time, right? Sure. So like just for the mail to go from Sydney to Hawaii, that could take like a month or so or more, right? So that's like just an aside thing of that first royal order. So that one is also his personal one is still in the Sydney archives that I've seen it. There's the pictures in that article, by the way, that article in the Hawaiian Journal of History. But yes, to get into the more concrete or like more tangible things of like posterity things that he did is that he, in these correspondences that he had, so he had a correspondence with Wiley obviously all the time, but then he had correspondences with the king of Fiji before he came there to become Chief Justice. That was also part of it, but also with the king of Tonga already from the 1850s onwards with Tupou I, and also with various high chiefs in Samoa. So he did this kind of correspondence with these, particularly with those three Pacific Island countries, and essentially advised because they asked him for advice, and then he sent them, for example, copies of the Hawaiian Constitution. And for that, and because of him being the kind of intermediary there, That's why how all three of those copied the Hawaiian Kingdom Constitution and created constitutional monarchies based on the Hawaiian Kingdom. Now, only in Tonga was this long lasting because Tonga still operates under this constitution that is now has been updated a few times, but it's still like I would say maybe 70% or so is still identical with the Hawaiian 1864 constitution. And but Fiji and Samoa also at one point had constitutions that they tried to establish themselves as constitutional monarchies along the same lines. Now they did not really succeed, right? Samoa became taken over by the Germans. Fiji became taken over by the British. So that was these kind of attempts of modern state formation and constitutional kingdom were like rather short-lived in those two. But nonetheless, they did exist and they did function for short periods in both of those as well. And then in Tonga, of course, it has this like in very important legacy to being essentially the only Pacific country that was never formally colonized, and kind of where the constitution survives till this date. So in that sense, his legacy is really important, particularly for Tonga. And many history books of Tonga actually do acknowledge him as being as playing that important role in kind of facilitating this kind of exchange, particularly that constitutional exchange between Tonga and between Hawaii and Tonga. And then there was also like because Saint Julian, after he went to Fiji and then he died pretty shortly afterwards, then it was also taken over by another British citizen of Sydney, Edward Reeve, who did actually like some of the follow-up. So particularly the constitutional process in Tonga was then also kind of continued with this guy, Edward Reeve. He kind of continued to do this kind of liaison between Hawaii and Tonga in the 1870s and 80s. So, but yeah, like so St. Julian and then his successor Reeve, they really play an important role. Like without them, the Tongan constitution that is a copy of the 1864 constitution would probably not have happened the way it did.
That is incredible. And if you guys haven't tuned into the episode before this with Dr. Umi Perkins, he said he was actually there during like the 150th celebration of the Constitution of Tonga. They just had a big celebration. Are you aware of that?
Yeah, they had. So shortly, so I was there in December last year. That was a different anniversary. That was the 50th anniversary of the university that I was teaching in Tonga from 2007 to 2019, and then Umi's parents taught there back in the 1980s. So for that 50th anniversary of that Tongan university, we both were there to we saw each other the last time. But but shortly before, like in November, and maybe Umi was there already. I'm not sure whether he was there before. He may have been there because I only came for that university event, but he may have been there before. I don't know. But
yeah, he was.
Yeah, okay,
yeah.
yeah. But so about a month, less than a month earlier, like a few weeks before, they had their official like state celebration for like the 150th anniversary of the Tongan Constitution, which was in November of 1875, right? So like 150th anniversary, and they have some big celebrations there. Yes.
Wow. Well, congratulations, Tonga. I think I'm saying that right? You say T's
Yes.
like D.
Like let's slide slightly towards the D. Yes.
Slightly.
Yeah.
Congratulations for them and for everybody that's listening, across the planet that, maybe have some koko Hawaii. I always say if you have a little bit, you're a Hawaiian subject, and no matter where you are in the world, if you're in Australia, maybe check out the archives there. If you're in Tonga, maybe look at the 1864 Hawaiian Kingdom Constitution and Tonga's Constitution and study them parallel, right? And it's a good way to study languages, I believe. Pretty much. So that's a really interesting thing that I'm so grateful that you guys are highlighting that, because I had no idea that Hawaii had any impact. We were portrayed a lot in movies as the ones that are making spam with peanut butter cups, and that's about it, right? So I didn't know we had the highest literacy rate in the 19th century of any country. I didn't know that, I mean, technically what's interesting and why one of the reasons I'm doing a podcast is because I thought, my kupuna were alive, being that they, adopted telephones and electricity and had
Mhm.
opera houses. They're very forward facing when it came to technology. And I guess in a way, and maybe I'm oversimplifying this concept. But in a way, I feel like Kamehameha III was open to people working virtually for him, like Charles St.
Mhm.
Julian, who never worked in the Hawaiian
Exactly.
Kingdom.
Yes. Yes.
Um, and the cool thing too about that, I want the viewers to really understand, because I feel like when we look at Hawaii, they really try to force us into this like ethnic group. And if you're Native Hawaiian, and they only, even the apology resolution, it's like apologize to the Native
Oh,
Hawaiians.
of course.
But I think there's a huge apology that should have been shared to St. Julian and his descendants because
Oh,
of
of
the
course.
overthrow. I mean, he gave his whole life to the Hawaiian Kingdom, and as someone that wasn't ethnically Hawaiian, he was French or British subject, like you were saying.
Mhm.
But that was the one thing I loved about the Hawaiian Kingdom and learning is like we hired who was qualified, right? Who
Mhm.
could do the job at the highest level. And really, race wasn't an issue for the Hawaiian Kingdom. Would you agree?
Oh yeah, yeah. No, I would agree. I would agree that that is one of the fascinating things too. That Hawaii was like in the 19th century was one of the in this period when there was this is the period of nationalism, right? This is like if you look historically, like the 19th century is essentially when most countries kind of transformed into these kind of ethno states, right? And they formed and they started to oppress minorities and try to force the national language, not just overseas. That's like the different like overseas colonialism obviously is one thing, but even in their own countries, right? France started to like beat everybody who for speaking Breton or speaking Basque or speaking the regional like the British started to beat the Welsh and the Irish and the Scots for like speaking Gaelic, right? And those kind of so this is like
Mhm.
that. This is the time when it really when these nation states tried to become ethno states, and there was like this ethno nationalism being the guiding kind of the guiding ideology pretty much of most countries. That is one of the and then it kind of it kind of came together with like social Darwinism, like a lot of these kind of really ugly kind of things that were part of like that kind of nationalism, the way it became kind of the state ideology for most countries. And the fact that during that same period, I mean, of course, Hawaii also, I think, how Hawaii was influenced by that as well in a way, in a positive way, is that Kalākaua focused on that Hawaiian cultural renaissance, the sense of like, we shouldn't just ape the Haole, we should be our own, we should be a modernizing country based on Kanaka values. In that sense, there was kind of that nationalism too, but it was never ethno-nationalist by blood in the same way that many of these kind of Western or other like modernizing nations, including Japan, also that copied more of that ethno blood nationalism from the West, right? It's like a big contrast here with Hawaii that was just really trying to create. I mean, they were certainly focusing on cultural heritage and being strong about that, and like particular like we are like Native Pacific Islander people, and we need to kind of foster that. We should not just become Westernized, but we also embrace kind of other people. Like we don't just insist on this is just the bloodline period, and we exclude everybody else. But it's like really like a kind of a focus on a certain sense of multi ethnicity and multiculturalism, and have all of that under the umbrella of the Hawaiian Kingdom. So I think that is something that made Hawaii also quite unique in the 19th century.
Yep. And it's so interesting how welcoming the Hawaiian Kingdom was
Mm-hmm.
to all ethnicities. I believe the first Western trained Chinese doctor, right,
Mm-hmm.
was educated in the Hawaiian Kingdom. Sun Yat-sen, right,
Yes.
went to be the
Well, he
founder.
was. I mean, it's kind of an understatement to call him the first Western-educated Chinese doctor. That you just think somebody who is important in the medical history. But I mean,
Yeah.
this guy became the national hero of China, right? He's the one who led the revolution of 1911 and the first president of the Republic of China. So I mean, sure. I mean that doctor
Yeah,
part
yeah.
is part true.
There's
It's just
that,
like
and then
looks
there's the
like
founding
that's
father
a
of China.
well, yeah, I know. So it's like
Yeah, and you wouldn't think that Hawaii was helping to modernize China by ending the Qing dynasty, but it's kind of what he was up to. And I think there was a newspaper, wasn't there, that he kind of says a quote. Do you remember what that was that Sun Yat-sen said?
Yeah, so that is actually like so. I want to be a little caution about it a little bit because there are some scholars who have done some more research, particularly some who speak Chinese, which I don't. So that's obviously, I mean, I speak Hawaiian, but I don't speak Chinese. So you should always be careful, like what languages you
Sure,
speak,
sure, sure.
what kind of sources you can access. So I think I think I need to step back a little bit with my enthusiasm about Sun Yat-sen, in the sense of that I have maybe sometimes a little like too enthusiastically overrepresented a little bit of that Hawaiian connection, in the sense of, again, not, there's nothing that's actually wrong in my own research. I'm not saying that all the sources, all that, but there are also some quotes of him that are represented in English that may actually be not, or even in Hawaiian that may actually not really what he said. So there is some debate about that quote, whether he actually said it that way because there's a quote that he's supposed to have said in 1910, while on a visit to Hawaii, where he said, "This is my Hawaii. This is where I grew up, and this is where I learned what modern democratic government means, and the kind of the values that they're based on, or something like that." So it's but the thing is that one of the problems with that quote is that I've have again I used it in my own work on Sun Yat-sen, but I've heard from some scholars who actually speak Chinese who have studied Sun Yat-sen from obviously they lack some of that Hawaiian part too, because they're Sinocentric, which is problematic too, because I think we need a scholar who speaks Mandarin fluently and Hawaiian to actually re-examine Sun Yat-sen. That would be something to hope for in the future, to have you write a Hawaii-centered biography of Sun Yat-sen by somebody who speaks fluent Mandarin and can read all those sources, and maybe Cantonese as well, because that was actually his native language. So
that's true.
Well, and Hakka as well. He was part Hakka, part Cantonese. So I think he spoke both Hakka and Cantonese as his native or parental languages, and then Mandarin as his third probably, and then Hawaiian, and then English. Right? So he's probably somebody who spoke 5 languages. I assume. And anyway, so I think there is some like, so my research has been a little shallow on their Chinese part. I admit that. And again, some Chinese history experts have actually doubted, because that quote was actually only published 15 years later in 1925 by that Paradise of the Pacific newspaper. And so, I mean, I'm a little that there's some, I think, good reasons that may have a little bit been over exaggerated. But then at the same time, there's other quotes from him where he is actually, so some of my Chinese friends did actually help me find some sources that I was not aware of, where there is some other pretty strong arguments by Sun Yat-sen about, talking about how Hawaii did influence him, and the kind of the politics of Hawaii, the political discussions in Hawaii. So I mean, there's definitely, and I mean, it's definitely true that like the Hawaiian kingdoms, like growing up in the Hawaiian kingdom, did have an impact on him for sure, and that some of the ideas of modern governance, of the modern statehood that he had, and also this idea of hybridizing kind of native statecraft with like Western ideas of statecraft. I mean, obviously, much of that was influenced through his upbringing in Hawaii. I mean, I think there's no question about it. It's just like sometimes I think we need to re-examine it more by using more of the Chinese and Cantonese language source, which I think Cantonese is written in the same. No, that's the thing, because Cantonese even has its own writing system that's slightly different from most of the other Chinese dialects just use exactly the same as Mandarin, but Cantonese has its own kind of coding for certain characters that makes it. So I think you need actually there's a different Cantonese way of writing as well. So anyway, I mean, we really need somebody who has like a Mandarin, Cantonese, and Hakka expertise besides the Hawaiian expertise to look into it. Like, I mean, if somebody like that wants to work with me, I can do the Hawaiian and English part, and then I'm totally up for that. But again, I think we need to re-examine a little bit more from the Chinese side. But again, I'm just trying to put my own research down. Just want to, we need to apply the same standards everywhere, right? So exactly. And that's why like I said, my caveat, I may have been a little bit over enthusiastic with that 2017 article on Sun Yat-sen, but I still think that most of the core of my argument still stands. Like obviously the Hawaiian Kingdom, Hawaii, I mean, Sun Yat-sen would not who he was would not have been who he was if for his childhood in the Hawaiian Kingdom. That is certainly a big part of his biography. That's definitely true.
Well, I think too, I mean, just off the top of my head, I don't know where on the planet that educated and I'd hate to be super frank, but just the Chinese race in general, I think most of them countries were discriminating against the Chinese in the 19th
Yes.
century. So I don't know where he could have went to get an education, to be honest, during that time. Would
Mhm.
that be a fair statement?
Well, I mean, yes and no. I mean, sure, I mean, you know what, I mean, he did end up right after Hawaii, he went to Hong Kong, right? And Hong
Right,
Kong
right,
being
right.
a British colony that did have this, like, I mean, it also discriminated against the Chinese, right? It had like in Hong Kong had all the way till the 19, I think to the
A British colony.
1970s, they had actually clubs that say no Chinese allowed, right? So it was an apartheid-like colonial system, like all the British colonies were. So of
Mhm.
course it did discriminate against the Chinese, but it also did give Chinese chances of like Western education. So there
Mhm.
was like a medical school that he actually ended up going to in Hong Kong, right? So that was probably the, in a way, like, you know, that obviously Hong Kong being a British colony, but with a Chinese majority that were barred from the highest levels of society, but were not barred from all the middle levels of society, right? So in that sense, that was definitely better to be in Hong Kong than, let's say, be in the United States or be in like a
Absolutely.
European
Yeah.
country or be in Brazil or like in any of those where they were really discriminating
Oh,
against
yeah.
Chinese and tried to keep them in the coolie category pretty much and not let them move anywhere on the social ladder. So yeah, I mean, in that sense, but of course, Hawaii was the only country that had no bars whatsoever. You could become a privy council member, right? When Chun Afong, I'm not sure if I pronounce his name correctly, was a privy council member of King Kalākaua, right? A Chinese merchant from Canton.
I did
Um,
not know that. I think
yes.
let's pause and I want the viewers to really let that sink in. There was a member of the Privy Council of the Hawaiian
Mm-hmm.
Kingdom from southern China,
Yes, Chun Afong.
Chun Ah-fong. And that means that, obviously that apology bill in 1993 that just apologizes to Native Hawaiians doesn't speak to someone that served in the Privy Council,
Mm-hmm.
right? Nobody's apologizing to the Fang Ohana for the overthrow of their government that they helped. You see what I'm saying? Like people gave their
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
lives
yeah.
for a country that weren't necessarily Hawaiian at all. And I think that's why I really have created this podcast, right? To really
Mm-hmm.
expose what the Hawaiian Kingdom was up to as a
Mm-hmm.
multi-ethnic country by interviewing people like you, some of the brightest minds in
Mm-hmm.
Polynesia. So
Yeah.
in the Pacific Ocean, because you speak like 8 languages, Polynesian language or something like that, isn't it?
Well, wait. Don't again.
Oh, I don't want
Some
to.
people,
Sorry, sorry.
some people are like some people are telling things about me that
All
are
right.
like too that are
Sure, sure. Clarify.
flattering, but exaggerated. So I mean, I do speak like two Polynesian languages really well that I have like learned, like that I've taken 5 years each, and which is one is Olelo Hawaii. That I even though now even that has become a little rusty because I don't practice it though, like since moving away from Hawaii, I don't practice it the same way. But you know, I mean any newspaper in 19th century I can still like, I mean I use it as a source material. I mean I can always like, you know, get myself back into it, of course. So that one, but when I was at UH, I spoke it quite well. And then also Reo Tahiti, the Tahitian language, which I also learned for 5 years, and I've done a lot of work with that language as well. So those are the ones that I'm like most comfortable. Now, of
Hmm.
course, based on that, because the Polynesian languages are all very similar, or have similar grammar, I mean, I have a good level of understanding of like Cook Islands Maori and of New Zealand Maori as well, but not at the same level. Like I could not really fully converse in those, but I can read myself through like documents in those as well. And then the Western Polynesian languages that are slightly different, I did obviously live in Tonga for a while, so I took also like 2 years of Tongan, and I took 2 years of Samoan at UH as well. So I have some basic, but I would not be nowhere near speaking those in any comfortable, fluent way. Like I would have to like if I have a Tongan text, it takes me like you know like many hours to translate it. I need to look up half of the words and everything. Plus the grammar is also more complex in Samoan and Tongan than in the Eastern Polynesian languages. So I would not say that I speak that many, but I mean, you know, I have like a basic understanding of like Polynesian languages, and I do not shy away from like if I have like a word in one of these, I like actually do like thorough research and look it up, and don't just superficially like use it or whatever. So yeah, I mean, some
Gotcha.
linguistic expertise, yeah, but mainly
Right.
focused on Hawaiian and Tahitian,
Now,
yeah.
I do speak Mandarin, Portuguese, and so I was thinking like, oh, maybe I could help with the Sun Yat-sen translation a little bit, but
Sure.
I don't speak Cantonese very strongly, but so the cool thing is hopefully this inspires research, right? That maybe you just inspired a dissertation, right? It's for somebody to really dive in.
Definitely, yeah. No, I
Uh,
mean, I think that really needs to, because I think there's really a lack of a kind of thorough study of, like, not just Sun Yat-sen, but of like some of the key, like, Chinese families or Chinese people in Hawaii in the 19th century and their descendants and their role in politics. Again, that they need to move away from this kind of Chinese American kind of framework that they're normally being put in, right? Because there's a lot of studies. I mean, there's even autobiographies, right? Some of the families, there's like 4 or 5 books, but none of them really takes into account the kind of Hawaiian Kingdom, and none of the author speaks Hawaiian, right? It's always like English Mandarin, right? So it always kind of puts the kind of Western versus, always kind of assumes Hawaii is already part of the West and part of the Anglosphere, and like, even if they acknowledge it wasn't the US yet, quote unquote, it was still the Hawaiian Kingdom, but it's still the Hawaiian Kingdom, just this kind of westernized, essentially somewhat of an appendix of North America somehow. And they don't really kind of, so it's like a Chinese in a Western context, right? It's the Chinese American or Chinese diaspora in the Anglo world kind of narrative. And it totally takes away like 90% of the, or well, 80 or something percent of the citizenry of the Hawaiian Kingdom that was Kanaka and that spoke a little Hawaii, right? So that always gets lost in these narratives. So I think somebody who, like, again, these Chinese diaspora families in Hawaii need to be like re-examined from the point of view of somebody who is a Chinese studies scholar. Absolutely, that's very necessary, because a lot of you cannot understand properly a Chinese person without understanding the language that they speak. But you also need to have that Hawaiian background and that Polynesian background, and that is like so absolutely, like, people like that would absolutely be needed. Just to add something, because I know you mentioned that about Mr. Alfong. Actually, or more properly, Mr. Chun, right? Because they always get the names, like the first name is the surname, right? People got it, including Hawaiian Kingdom officials, they got it wrong too, right? So unfortunately, I'm not saying they were that better in there. I mean, they were better in respecting people, as respecting the Chinese, and not discriminating against them. But they were also they were often just as bad as the English ones in like screwing up their names when they registered them at immigration. Unfortunately, so they didn't do that much. They didn't do that better than the ones in New York City or wherever, or in San Francisco. But anyway, so Mr. Chun, his career is interesting. He is actually not, so his descendants did not stay in Hawaii, because he actually, after the bayonet coup of '87, he when actually discrimination started to happen against Chinese, and he was a millionaire, right? He was rich. He even owned a plantation on the Big Island. So he was somebody who could afford to like move away, and then he just moved back to like southern China. But the interesting thing is that he was married to a Kanaka woman, and he had a half Hawaiian, like ethnic, half Kanaka Papa son, who he took with him to China. And this guy, now again, hold your breath. He was at one point governor. He became governor of Guangdong province. So here we have a native Hawaiian, and actually Kanaka ruling a Chinese province, right, back in the 1920s under Sun Yat-sen, under the Kuomintang government.
I'm not pausing for dramatic effect, but
Yeah.
I might be pausing for dramatic effect. What?
Yeah. So that's something that also needs to, and again, I mean,
sure.
the way, not trying to contradict myself, of course, we have many non-ethnic Hawaiians, obviously, that are important and need to be acknowledged. But even if we look at just the native Hawaiian kind of term in the sense of the blood, the koko kind of definition, there are so many of them in southern China that we're not aware of, because so many, after the discrimination set in with the bayonet, and particularly with the overthrow, many Chinese, like those who could afford it, essentially moved back to China because they couldn't, they didn't want to live in this horrible, like racial discriminatory, like white supremacist regime of Dole and all his people, right? So many of them moved back to China, and then many of them had arrived as single men, so they had married Kanaka women, and then they took that family back, or at least maybe they left the wahine in Hawaii, but they often took the kids, particularly the male kids, with them, right? So there's a lot of actually ethnically Hapa Hawaiian people in southern China that we kind of got cut off from in many ways. And there's this scholar who I forgot his he's Chinese Hawaiian from he teaches at Oklahoma. What's his name? I'm always bad at remembering names. But there's a professor who's Hawaiian Chinese who teaches at somewhere in Oklahoma, I think. Or I forgot. Was it in Oklahoma? Somewhere in the American continent, further away, not the Pacific coast. And he has done some work about that. He has started to, because he speaks Mandarin as well. He has started to research like his family, and he came across a whole branch of his family living in southern China, like of actually Hapa Hawaiian Chinese families there. And there's literally hundreds of them, probably thousands of them. And that is like often, and they get, because China doesn't do the racial thing the way that Western countries do, right? If you're raised in a Chinese, particularly if you're in the patrilineal descendant, if you have a Chinese father, right, and then you're raised in a Chinese classics, then you're pretty much Chinese. It doesn't really matter how you look like, whether you're part something else, right? So in that sense, and because of that different culture attitude, it also kind of got lost, I guess, in many of those families, that identity. But but it's still there, and it may still be there in certain ways of And again, this is the big chance for like researchers to like actually look into that and connect with those people. And like I said, some of them made it, like even like that half Hawaiian kid of that half Hawaiian son of Afong. I think he went by the Western name Tony Afong, but then his proper Hawaiian Chinese name is I think Shan Shiru, I think, if I pronounce it correctly. So he, like I said, he moved up in the ranks of the Kuomintang and became actually governor of Guangdong province in which is like the biggest province of China, right? This is this was already back then like 30 million people. Now it's like over 100 million, right? The biggest province of China, and that had a native Hawaiian, like by the blood definition, a native Hawaiian governor back in the 1920s. So think about that.
My eyeballs are about to pop out of my head. Like I don't know. These are the conversations that I've had with Lorenz Gonschor. We've had many conversations prior to this. Every time there's a moment like this, but I always felt like, man, if I could just capture that, right? So I feel like we captured some of that magic today, and incredible. And originally we started off, right, talking about Australia, and I hope the viewers are realizing that the book, the title, Power in Oceania, there's a reason, right? And I think if you add the element of like Dr. Keanu Sai's work about, what do the laws of occupation look like for people that are under occupation? Because it appears that way to a lot of international scholars. We got Federico Lanzarini from Italy, outside people looking in, Harvard graduate, Dr. DeZayas looking in. It's like, it appears occupation. So if you apply that legal framework, there's no statute of limitations based on your nationality during occupation, right? That transfers, there's what that means is, an occupation could be there 1,000 years, but if you have a descendant that was a national of that country, once that occupation ends, that country's nationality survives throughout time. So it's been 133 years of occupation according to that framework, which means that, I mean, you see where I'm going with this, right? The governor of Guangzhou could have been a Hawaiian subject because of his mother.
Oh yeah, no, he definitely was. Like,
yeah, he was a Hawaiian subject.
That he had that, of course, yeah.
And that's why we're doing this show. And I want to say, correct me if I'm wrong. So here we have a document for those that are, maybe in Tonga that are trying to learn Olelo Hawaii, or those that are in Hawaii that, are Tongan descent. Maybe the Constitution of 1864 would be a really good way to learn the languages, right? Because 70% today is used, right? Just to do a side by side. That could be
Well,
a really good
although
choice.
Unfortunately, I just want to
Sure,
again a
sure.
little caveat here. It was, just to bring a little precision here to this. Unfortunately, I wish this was a kind of linguistic exchange that way, but
Mm.
unfortunately it wasn't. So it was done through the medium of English, right? So Saint
Oh,
Julian
okay.
did not speak Olelo
Oh,
Hawaii.
right, 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 right.
And actually, Wiley didn't speak Olelo Hawaii either, at least not well. Like
Mhm.
he probably spoke enough to go to the market and buy like poi and whatever. But I mean, which because you really needed Olelo on the
Yeah,
streets of
yeah.
the Hawaiian Kingdom. So I'm sure he could go to the market and
Yeah,
order
for
poi in
sure, for
Olelo
sure.
Hawaii. But he could not really speak it well, right? I mean, even though he was a multilingual too, he spoke Spanish and French fluently, but he was for some reason just like very much trapped in the European way of linguistics, and he never did a try at Olelo at all. And I know from the Privy Council, like they always people had to, when like whatever Kikuanoa spoke or whatever, then Judd had to translate it for him. Like there's records of that, right? So I mean, Wiley did not speak Hawaiian well.
Gosh.
So unfortunately, so of course, and Wiley was the main correspondent in Honolulu, so that whole correspondence with St. Julian was all in English. There was not a word of Olelo in it, unfortunately.
Got it.
And so the Constitution he was, of course, the 1864 Constitution. St. Julian had, in his hands, was the English version, and then he gave that to Tonga, and then people translated that into Tongan.
From
So
English to
if you
Tonga.
put
Okay,
it, if
got
you put it, I mean, it's still worth, I think, putting it side to
it.
side, but just be aware that nobody did like an
Got it.
inter-Polynesian exchange here, right? It went through the medium of English. So that's
Of English.
important
Got it.
also to understand and to
Right.
know.
And there's a lot of truth to that. I believe the Hawaiian Kingdom was a very bilingual country,
Mhm.
English and Hawaiian. But the reason for this research really, and I don't know, I'm challenging all those with PhDs in Hawaiian history, like
Mhm.
yourself, because there's just been a plethora of like these quote unquote YouTube historians, and they've
Mhm.
got great graphics and all kinds of stuff, and they're telling Hawaii's story. But most of them don't speak Olelo Hawaii, right? I would say
Mhm.
all of them don't. Um, but the reason why the focus on the Hawaiian language is so important, I think Dr. Ron Williams said it like this, that 1893, I believe 94% of the population speaks Olelo Hawaii. Only 6% speak English. So he's like, it's kind of like looking at everything for in American history, right? In the 19th century or whenever you're studying it, and asking for all the archives in Italian. Sure, you'll learn some
Exactly.
things.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. No, I really love that metaphor that Ron put like out like
Oh,
years
gosh.
ago. Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And hopefully I can have him on the show next or soon because I want to dive into that. So really like looking at Hawaiian, I mean, the most literate country in the 19th century, but looking at the language they spoke in the 19th
Mhm.
century, which
Yeah,
predominantly a little of and using that
yeah.
framework. But
Yeah, actually, there's another interesting thing because you're saying it's a
mhm,
bilingual country, and I would say yes.
mhm,
Mainly, and I think constitutionally, like I don't think there was an act that proclaimed and one of them actually an official language by act, which many countries don't have that anyway. But I
sure.
mean, I would say the de facto official languages were like English and Hawaiian, and many laws also have specified that this needs to be published, whatever certain things need to be published in English and Hawaiian. So I would say we can say that English and Hawaiian were the two de facto official languages of the Hawaiian Kingdom. However, I think there was a third one emerging that would have probably become a third official language. And you guess which one that would be? I guess it's kind of logical from what we're
It
just
sounds like it's
discussing.
going to be Guangdong Hua, like some Putong Hua
Yeah,
or
yeah,
Mandarin. Yeah.
exactly, because they started
Interesting.
to publish like back like in the 18 I think in 1880 late 80s or so. They had the entire civil code published in Chinese, and then they
Wow.
started to do proclamations, and I mean not systematically yet, but they
Hmm.
started to publish law books and law text in Chinese as well. So that became so I think that was like, if it wasn't for, of course, Bayonet reversed all of that. Now they were
Yeah,
actually like, they
true.
even did these things like where they passed a law that Chinese merchants have to actually keep their business books in English, or like in or English or Hawaiian. Like they prohibited them from keeping their business records in Chinese, so that just as a way of harassing and discriminating them.
Oh God.
So I
Yeah.
mean, that was certainly that discrimination that kind of came to resemble those discriminations in the United States and many British colonies and all of that. but before bayonet, I think there was the evolution was towards the trilingual, where like Chinese would do, and I'm sure they would have the same thing with Portuguese as well, because I know the newspapers were already emerging. So
Yeah,
I mean that I think if this country had been left undisturbed, I think we would have ended up probably by about 1910 with like 5 official languages that were all like obviously Olelo Hawaii being the native language and having a certain prestige. English also having a high prestige as being an international language that was like that you could communicate with the entire world. But then certainly they would have Chinese, Portuguese, and Japanese probably as co-official languages as well, because of all that, particularly all that press that was
sure.
emerging in those 3 languages.
No, I just want to share this because this just happened. This weekend, I actually did a protest because of the lack of research and from
Mhm.
the Asian American community in Hawaiian, like we're challenging to do. But obviously, I have some sense because you're my friend, and
Mhm.
I've learned some of these things. But imagine this, just on the AANHPI, okay,
Mhm.
put on their annual event. It's a big event, right? With
Mhm.
all the Asian Pacific communities. So there's representation from Tonga, Fiji, right?
Mhm.
Taiwan, China, and and they had this big annual event. And guess where they held it? What building? The
Mhm.
McKinley Arts Center, named
Oh
after
my
William
gosh.
McKinley.
Oh my
That's
gosh.
that was my reaction, right? I'm like, and unfortunately, they had a halal that came to present the hula,
Mhm. Yeah.
and I was already vocal before I brought my pool, and I was because I think if this were to happen in Hawaii, right, that the NHPI met at like McKinley High School or something, like
Yeah.
there would be Hawaiians protesting.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, there absolutely would be, but they hired a halal from California, right?
Mhm.
So the halal here didn't do it in Reno because I actually lectured. I used Keanu Sai's PowerPoint presentation and
Mhm.
spoke to the halal about, Francis Newlands under the McKinley administration,
Mhm.
what happened without the treaty. So the local halal didn't dance, but they hired, I guess they hired him the last 2 years, but this is why this is so significant. And I had the Kue petitions with me and my poo, and I was kind of blowing it. I was I was trying to be strategically rude, not that I had anything against the halal
Sure.
but I don't have a bone of judgment for in my body for anyone because really we're all victims of this denationalization, right? We didn't have our
Of course.
history.
Of course.
But I felt if I had the information, I should make people a little bit uncomfortable that we're watching, a Hawaiian expression of culture under the name McKinley.
Oh, of course. Absolutely. Yeah.
So and again, I apologize in my last podcast to the halal, apologize again, and probably apologize the rest of my life because I meant
Mhm.
no offense
Yeah,
to
sure.
the people dancing. It was just not the place I felt for it. So anyways, that's why this research is so invaluable. And I see a lot. I'm very vocal online, and I
Mhm.
think I have about 22,000 posts in the last decade. I'm very like I try to learn and share.
Yeah.
Because my thing is, I went to Hilo High School. I didn't get into Kamehameha School, so I didn't have
Mhm.
this history accessible, for free. Um, so I want to make this kind of like more common. So I hope that
Mhm.
at least the idea of occupation is a
Mhm.
little bit more normalized, because I think that was
Yeah.
the first mission of the Council of Regency was to just, you know, get used to this idea, right?
Yeah.
So that's why I post so much, but also I have the
Yeah.
metaphor of being a mosquito, right?
Yeah.
Just being in the air, right? You can't get
Sure.
rid of
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Bzzz.
Of
Um,
course. Yeah.
so and Umi kind of mentioned this at the end of my podcast. He's like, I commend your consistency or something like
Mhm.
that. It's just
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
but I'm trying to, that's the idea of this, you know, keep having these conversations until this gets normalized so that we
Of
can,
course.
get people that focus on this research. But what's really interesting was at the end of my protest, leaders from the AANHPI came up to me about changing the name
Absolutely, yeah.
of McKinley Art Center. So this is something that really shocked me because I thought, wow, here is a group, AANHPI, all the way in Reno, Nevada, wanting to have strategic meetings about changing this name because it doesn't represent just
Mhm.
the place in Reno,
Yeah.
right? We're in Nevada,
Well,
right?
I mean, it's worse than that. I mean, if it was whatever John F. Kennedy or Eisenhower or
Right.
whatever, then it would just be irrelevant and not
Yeah,
represent.
it would
But
it
this one
would
is worse than that. It actually represents the one who is the architect of the oppression of Asia, of the American oppression of parts of Asia and parts of the Pacific. I mean, that's the guy who's like if you're Asian American, if you're Asian American Pacific Islander, that's like the worst guy of American history for you people's history. You know what I mean? So I mean, come on.
yes, that's where I was. That's why I was there. And I told and it's funny because one of the members actually came to my class, but he was like, I'm gonna have to escort you out because I'm usually not loud. I'm very like,
Yeah,
but they were trying to remove me from the building because of my
yeah.
food. But I I don't often, protest, but I felt the need. But anyways, he was actually in my course, so I had Keanu slides. He went through everything, but he showed up a little late, so maybe he missed some things. But at the end of the day, no disrespect to the organization or the halal, but just the place, right? Like if you really know about McKinley, I mean, it's bad. 200,000 Filipinos lost
Of
their
course,
lives.
yeah.
The Hawaiian Kingdom's been occupied for
Well,
over,
and that's a conservative estimate, right? Like some
yeah, it's
Filipino
conservative. Oh, yeah,
Filipino
it goes to a
American
million
War.
almost,
Some
right?
people go up to like I mean the highest estimates are 3 million. They may be too high, and the lowest estimates are about 200,000. So it goes like like in many of those conflicts that it's hard to really have a proper count of, particularly like 100 years later. But yeah, that was a brutal war for sure.
It was
Like
a brutal
I mean,
war.
I normally would say like maybe 1 million is probably right. I don't know because of just getting, I guess maybe settling somewhere in the middle. But yeah, I would say probably more than 200,000. Yeah.
Yeah, way more. And it was funny because there was a booth that from the Philippines and there were some
Yeah.
Lolos there. And I talked to them and I said,
Yeah.
very respectfully, I was like, do you know about, the who McKinley was to the Philippines? And they didn't.
Yeah.
I don't think it's widely taught. So it's just one of those things like we're Hawaii, if we can get our history back and kind of
Mhm.
normalize this,
Yeah.
it'll expose, I think, a lot of the injustice
Yeah,
throughout
I know.
Polynesia.
Well, thankfully, the Filipinos had President Duterte. Like, even though he was a crook on in
Sure.
other respects, right? But Duterte was the one who was speaking out about it, right? Remember
Yeah.
how he talked to Obama and said like, and he like swore at him and said, I think he actually used swear words. He was
Wow.
saying, because that's how he was, right? He is get the something like I mean you killed like 1 million of my people, so get your fucking troops out of my country or something. Like he literally said something like that to Obama back in when
Wow.
they were like about talking about the like against bringing more American military because they had officially already canceled the bases, right? But then they tried to bring them back through the back door and under the
Oh
pretext
yeah.
of
Like
fighting terrorists and all this stuff.
yeah.
And I mean now they do it like under Marcos Jr. They go ballistic into this American militarism, but during Duterte, they were trying to push for that already under Obama, and then Duterte said no, and then he like swore at Obama and said, "You fucking Americans like killed 1 million of my people, so get the fuck out of my country." Or something. He said something like that, like literally in in those
I
words,
mean,
So
and it's hard because like, as a head of state, and I do guest lectures at UNR,
yeah,
right? So I didn't want to swear or get
yeah,
up
of
in
course,
arms. But like when you realize the genocide, I mean, any country that comes into your country and eliminates a million of
of
your
course.
people or occupies your country for over a century, like I brought the poo, I didn't swear. I brought the
Yeah, of
poo.
course. Yeah,
Okay. I
yeah,
kept,
sure, of course.
no swearing for me, but maybe it reminded me of the Chief of War scene at the end where the two kahuna were chanting because
Yeah, yeah.
they were doing their hula and chanting, and I was saying "Eho Omai" because I was trying to think, you
Mhm.
guys need to know this.
Yeah, yeah.
So it was kind of a weird chant battle, and I didn't know I could Oli until
Mhm.
that moment.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It's just all this mana came, and I was like,
Yeah, yeah,
um, So, okay, let's think like okay, so the Pacific understanding of Hawaii, how do scholars, leaders, and communities throughout Polynesian generally understand Hawaii's history today? And then do they view Hawaii as simply like another US state, or do they retain awareness of its former status as an internationally recognized kingdom?
Well, I mean, I guess it really depends, right? I mean, it's hard
Mm,
to kind of generalize. I think there are people who are, I mean, unfortunately, there's a lot of people who do have a UH connection, and then some of them went to like Pacific Studies and to Hawaiian Studies, and like, like through Pacific Studies at UH also like came across like people like Honani K and other and John Osorio and like some of the so I think there's many people do have the awareness that there is kind of that Hawaii is like an Oceanian part, and it was kind of, it was like it's under U.S. oppression, and the native people there are like oppressed by the U.S., and then it's kind of a bad thing for them. And so I think that is, like, I would say, generally, I think somewhat known. But of course, most people lack the kind of correct political understanding of occupation. I think that's something that is not well understood in. I mean, it's already not well understood in Hawaii itself, as you know, like you and I and many others are struggling, and Keanu and others, about that in Hawaii itself, but to kind of get the right narrative, get the right kind of political analysis. But I think, in the South Pacific there is, obviously the awareness is even, it's more blurry. You know what I mean? The kind of understanding. Of course, there is also, unfortunately, I mean, I think a lot of people do have, also, I guess, traveling there as tourists, and then just not seeing a single Hawaiian, just be staying in Waikiki, seeing some Asian people, and otherwise being like, there's also, of course, a much of that sense of like, this is completely Americanized. This is just like Florida in with Florida with mountains, pretty much. That kind of understanding, I guess, is also, unfortunately, that impression is quite frequent too. And then, many countries in the Pacific are not fully kind of appreciating Hawaii as part of the Pacific. I mean, many countries do actually classify it as part of North America. Fiji Airways and Air New Zealand and others, they list Honolulu under North American destinations, not under Pacific destinations. So there is some of that. The American propaganda and American raw power has made some impact there. There are some other instances where that's not the case. Like Tonga, for example, has always maintained in its phone book, where in the phone book you have, at the first couple of pages, you have, before you actually list the people in Tonga, you have the international country codes, what to dial to get into the right, like whatever. And then they always have Hawaii listed separate. They don't have like under United States, they have like whatever, New York, Chicago, blah, 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 all the like one, and then the one slash, and then whatever, the area code. But then they have a separate entry after Haiti there, or before Haiti, there's after between Georgia and Haiti, there is like Hawaii 1808, like as a national country code. So they and Tonga has always like, I'm sure the American embassy must have complained to them about it, but they never, like, they have always like made, they keep like reproducing that every year in their national phone book. So there is some, and probably there's also, I think, some, there's some awareness among the Tongan royal family, because they still maintain some of these connections with people in Hawaii. I think Tonga is I think particularly strong about having that knowledge about Hawaii being unoccupied, or being like at least not just normal, just like not a normal part of the U.S. That there is something kind of particular about Hawaii. So Tonga, I think, has, because of that particular memory that they have, that particular connection. Otherwise, I would say it's pretty blurry, I would say, overall. Yeah.
see. Well, let's just kind of touch on what you just said there. When comparing Hawaii and Tonga,
Mhm.
what lessons do you feel that we could learn, from the survival from one kingdom's government and the overthrow of another? Because I don't think people realize you were the author of Tonga's chapter in Unconquered States that went through a double-blind review published by
Yeah.
Oxford
Yes.
University. I think that's the largest university press in the world.
I don't know if, like, I don't
I believe
know
it's
how
pretty
you
big.
how you calculate largest in terms of books
Right.
published per year, or
I think so.
number
Yeah.
of copies. I don't know. That's a complicated question, how you define a large or not. But it's definitely one of the most renowned academic publishers in the world, for sure. One of the 3 or 4 the highest ranking academic publishers, that's for sure, yeah.
So maybe for the viewers that are kind of new to this subject, why do you feel, could you explain why the Hawaiian Kingdom was in there and why Tonga was in there and how they're actually similar and how their lessons can kind of protect their sovereignties or at least understanding of their current sovereignty?
Well, so the book was called Unconquered States. It came out of I came to this late to this project. It came out of a workshop that was held at Oxford University. Or was it Cambridge? I forgot. It's one of those two. They always kind of complement each other, even though they're rivals too. Kind of like Yale and Harvard in the US, right? It's that same kind of thing.
Right.
So anyway, so this book, it came out of this workshop that they held like way back in 2000, I don't know, 15 or so, or even earlier. And so the topic was unconquered states, or the kind of non-colonized states, pretty much countries in the that existed in the 19th century, and that were that did not go that typical route of like non-Western peoples or non-Western spaces becoming colonies, right? Because I guess the more normal route for most of the world, like pretty much most of Africa, most of Asia, right? Like India, British, whatever, most of West Africa, French, and so on and so forth. And so it looks into these countries, kind of the non-Western countries that like somehow survived that imperial age to be like as their own countries. Like rather than becoming colonized, they become modernized. They kind of hybridize their constitutional system with Western elements. Of course, the most famous, or maybe also infamous later, of that is Japan. That was very successful in like actually like, well, because the Americans would have colonized them if they had not resisted, right, with the Admiral Perry and all of that. But so Japan went from essentially a victim of like gunboat diplomacy very fast to become itself an imperial power that, of course, then eventually started to oppress its own neighbors and become an imperialist itself. But so Japan is obviously the most famous example. But then we look into other like smaller countries that were not so imperialistic, so that's why they're not as well known. But they also managed to survive, like Thailand, right? Thailand never was colonized, or Ethiopia in Africa was the only part of Africa that was never colonized. The empire of Ethiopia, that famous Haile Selassie that then inspired the Rastafarian movement, and therefore like Pan-Africanism back in the 20th century. So anyway, so these are some of the well-known cases. And Iran is another one, right? Iran, and it's kind of interesting in a way how history repeats itself. How like somebody in the White House and somebody in Tel Aviv thinks that they could easily conquer that country, and then they don't seem to have read their history that Iran was never conquered, but never let anybody conquer it ever, right? So that's kind of an interesting interesting case. Anyway, so Iran was one of the other countries that's in that, and actually this is important because the two editors of that, both the conveners of that workshop and also the editors were both I think Iranian Germans, like both Iranian Germans from academic Iranian German historians. And so anyway, so Keanu was invited to that workshop to present Hawaii because they included Hawaii in that list. They were kind of aware of that. And then later they decided to include Tonga as well, and they contacted me because they figured that Tonga itself, even though it was not like, I would say, not left like fully independent, like, or fully non-colonized, like the way that Siam, like Thailand was, for example, because it did become a British so-called protected state, right? The British imposed through gunboat diplomacy a treaty on Tonga that essentially gave up its foreign policy, its sovereignty essentially to Great Britain, right, for 70 years. So Tonga was essentially, it was still kind of, I guess, colonized in a way, but in a much lighter way than everybody else in the Pacific, right? It was internally, like the UK did never messed in Tonga's internal affairs during that period, but they kind of disabled Tonga from conducting its own foreign policy for 70 years, like from 1900 to 1970. So in that sense, it's kind of somewhat of a gray zone. And of course, Hawaii is a gray zone in a different way because its sovereignty, while it was never terminated, it ceased to be operational from in 1893 onwards, right? So in that sense, it's also not the same case, let's say, as Thailand or as Japan, that like really like survived, never being under any kind of foreign rule for the whole period. So, but these were like, I guess, borderline cases in many ways, but still strong enough and unusual enough in that kind of colonial period or in this imperial period that they both warrant inclusion in that volume. So that's kind of my understanding of why these two from the Pacific were selected. Certainly, these are the only in the Pacific that would in any way kind of qualify, because everybody else was just like, very clearly and clearly and simply becoming a colony at one point before many of them regained their independence, like Fiji, for example, right? Fiji became a British colony in 1874, and then almost 100 years later, in 1970s, it gains its independence as an independent state. But so yeah, I mean, I guess Hawaii and Tonga are the two cases of. I mean, of course, Hawaii at a much higher level of international recognition, and but then of course being in a way compromised through this occupation that's going on now, and then Tonga being also never colonized, but somewhat tainted with the 70 years of British protectorate that was kind of intervening in between to some extent. So that's kind of the, I guess. But I guess you're going to ask me what lessons to learn in comparison.
Well, if we could share with like Tonga
yeah.
that Hawaii could help with, or Hawaii from Tonga, like.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's interesting because you did have, like I said, you have Tonga. Tonga was interested in Tonga in the 19th century saw Hawaii as a model, right? It saw Hawaii as being the successful model of how a Polynesian kingdom can modernize and be recognized and kind of survive that way. Now, they of course, did not anticipate what would happen in 1893, and they were which is interesting enough, the same that coincides with the death of Tupou I, right? Their kind of founding father, that like larger than life figure that lived essentially through the entire. Right? He was almost 100 years old, right? He was born before 1800, right? He was like. He lived when Kamehameha the Great was still. I mean, he was a baby when Kamehameha the Great was still alive, right? So he, like, his life spent the entire 19th century. He died in his late 90s or so, and he, like, so that this is kind of this larger than life figure who dominated Tonga throughout pretty much the entire 19th century, and he would never have consented to that protectorate. I mean, it was his comparatively weaker great grandson Tupou II who was forced by the British with gunboat diplomacy to sign the treaty in 1900. But anyway, but Tupou I, he saw Hawaii, and he essentially had the idea, well, we need to be like them. We need to have that same constitutional system, so that's our way of survival. However, he also saw a few other things that he did not like in Hawaii, which is kind of interesting because in a way it contradicts some of the positive things both you and I agree. He was critical of this kind of multi-ethnic situation in Hawaii, and he was actually worried that could kind of compromise Tonga's sovereignty and Tonga's survival. So they made it very clear that they would not have any Chinese come to Tonga. That was actually written in the constitution. It was put out later, but it was originally in the constitution that Chinese were not allowed to be in Tonga. And they also kept the land tenure. Their land tenure reform was very different from the one in Hawaii. They also had a significant restructuring of the land tenure system, but they kept it essentially feudal in nature, so that there would be no individual land title, and land would still be essentially all owned by the king, and then given like on a kind of as feudal estates to the nobles, and then they would pass them on as feudal, like small holdings to the commoners. So to this day, it's essentially a feudal reformed. It's not entirely feudal anymore, like in the old system, but like it's essentially a reformed feudal system that has not been land title has not been individualized the way that it has been in Hawaii through the Mahela process. And again, that was and of course, many Tongans would say that is because it was prevented that there was never any plantation or anything owned by people not loyal to the king, and therefore that has protected Tonga better. So yeah, I mean, there was essentially, going back to this, what I was saying earlier, Tonga went the kind of typical late 19th century, Victorian Darwinistic nationalism, went that ethno-nationalist route, the kind of the same way like most other countries went in the 19th century. It did not adopt that kind of multi-ethnic nationhood the way that the Hawaiian Kingdom did. So that would be, besides obviously the difference in size, also the different in location. Of course, Tonga did never have as much land that was coveted by people to establish plantations or whatever. It didn't even have ports it had a little port in Vava'o that's somewhat attractive, but nonetheless, it was never as coveted because it didn't have the same either geostrategic or also economic opportunity, didn't have the same like huge fertile volcanic soils at that level of Hawaii, nor did it have a kind of strategic port location the way that like Pu'uloa and Honolulu Harbor had. So that also helped, of course, to be less attractive to like imperial powers to really like mess it over with the way that Hawaii was messed over with by the United States. So yeah, I mean that would be, I think, some lessons or some comparisons that could be drawn from those two cases.
What aspects of 19th century international law do you think are most frequently misunderstood when discussing Hawaii's political status?
Well, I mean, I think the idea of like the idea of sovereignty, right? The idea and the again, this is something that probably Keanu could answer better than me because I'm not as much of a law, right? I'm more of a political historian, not so much of a legal historian as Keanu is. So I don't want to go too much into the details here. But my understanding is that following particularly Keanu's work and instead of some other scholars that are legal based as well, like Donovan Preza and Williamson Chang and many others. So my understanding is that the that's how put it this way, that I guess people normally get mixed up with this difference of government and state, right? Like that if you overthrow a government, you kill the sovereignty, which is wrong, which is a wrong assumption, right? That in the way that because they overthrew the queen, therefore the kingdom ceases to exist, right? Which is that I think that's the most common misconception I think that people have, right, about the difference of sovereignty that's with the state and kind of control or actual control that is with the government, right? And that is to me that's I think what most people kind of misunderstand. But yeah, I think I would rather defer this question to people who are like much more into the legal international law. Like I said, I mean, I'm aware of it, but I don't want to overstep my own competence here.
I remember from taking Keanu's class, it was something like you could overthrow a government, but
Yes.
the state continues to exist. So like when Iraq was invaded, he would use that advice. It's not like Iraq exist.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Right.
Exactly. I know. But I think that now the difference though is, and I think that's also sometimes people don't fully get it, is that like in Iraq, the United States did not really pretend to do what it did in Hawaii, right? It never pretended to annex. It never said, "Oh, Iraq is now a territory of the United States," or Iraq is now the 51st or 50 whatever so state of the United States, right? They never tried to do that kind of try to cover up the occupation with a pretended annexation, right? They never did that, and the United States actually has never done it with another country after Hawaii. So they have occupied other countries, but they always kind of admitted that they're actually occupying them, maybe also for like weird reasons that are wrong and that are wrongful under international law, right? But I mean, it's still a violation. It's still a war crime to do what George Bush did. It's still a war crime what Trump is doing now with Iran, like attacking another country that has not attacked you. But at the same time, they still have not pretended to actually incorporate them. So I think that a more interesting parallel is what Russia has been currently doing with, of course, not with all of Ukraine, but with some of these eastern regions of Ukraine, where Russia has pretended that these eastern regions have now actually become part of Russia. Right, and that is, but then because Ukraine has never consented to that cession of sovereignty, right? There's never been a treaty of cession between Ukraine and the Russian Federation for these eastern oblasts of Ukraine. Crimea being the first one already back in 2014, but then the four eastern ones in 2022. That is obviously, that is kind of under the normal understanding of international law. That it doesn't need any modern UN and whatever. That's another aspect. But even under 19th century understanding, like essentially the Westphalian or Treaty of Vienna kind of system of international law, you can sovereignty has to be transferred by treaty. So since everybody and these oblasts were not, it's not like they were like disputed, right? Because Russia and Ukraine did recognize each other's borders back in 1991, right, when the Soviet Union collapsed. So there was no dispute about that border. It was like at one point they settled that border, right? And then later Russia invades and says, oh, and now these, because these people supposedly voted to become part of Russia, now they're part of Russia. So that is kind of, I guess, in a way, the almost most interesting parallel. Although it is, of course, still not different because it's not the entire country. It's not that all of Ukraine was occupied and then made supposedly part of Russia. It's only parts of it. But I would say there is actually the most interesting parallels that we can see.
Interesting.
The Israel-Palestine is also interesting, but even there is also not fully because Israel has not fully pretended to annex the entire Palestinian territories. They actually don't want it because they don't want all these Muslim Arabs to be their citizens, because then they would have to give them equal rights, and then their whole country would lose its nature as a quote-unquote Jewish state, right? So that's another thing where they actually keep most of the Palestinian territories under an occupation regime, which they themselves admit as being an occupation regime. They have only, but they did annex parts of the occupied territory. So, like the Golan Heights, for example, the Golan Heights that they occupied from Syria, that part they actually have proclaimed to be an Israeli whatever province or district or whatever they call their units. And then parts of the occupied West Bank, namely Eastern Jerusalem, they have done the same thing. They have also made that, like, supposedly annexed that and proclaimed to be part of the state of Israel. So that's kind of also similar to what Russia has been done in Eastern Ukraine. So these to me are the most interesting parallels, because they are actually, they're not just occupations like the US did in Iraq, but they are actually occupations that are being tried to be covered over by pretended annexations.
Interesting. Yeah, and what I find kind of interesting just along these lines is that, like if you look at Ukrainian, linguistically, right, there's a lot more. I think there are closer connections between the Ukrainian language and Russian than there would be with English, which is a Germanic language. And
of course, yeah.
So it's just so weird.
No, I mean, of course, the cultural context.
Cultural context is like,
of course, very, 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 very different, of course.
Isn't that, yeah. So it's like, it's hard. It's just interesting to me about how, I mean, I kind of have to take my hats off to the United States in their marketing for war propaganda and covering up. I mean, the United States is the entertainment capital of the world. So, I mean, they're good at telling stories.
Oh yeah, they're very good at brainwashing and spreading propaganda. They're the best. I mean, they're the top. They're the top, obviously. No propaganda machine has ever worked as well as the American one.
Yeah.
And I can tell you that because I grew up in Eastern Germany, right? Like my father lived through it. So we have seen propaganda, like my family, like we know what, but the funny thing is in the Eastern Bloc, and I don't want to put those countries down completely, because the communist countries also had some good things in terms of social social welfare and all of that. So I'm not saying that the Soviet system was entirely bad. No, I'm not there. But at the same time, it was also had many oppressive aspects to it. And of course it was like broadcasting propaganda 24/7. But the funny thing is, people in the Eastern Bloc, they knew it. Like every Soviet citizen who was smart knew that what comes out of the Kremlin is propaganda. Every East German citizen knew what comes out of the state media is propaganda. You have to take it with a grain of salt. There may be some truth in it, but half of it is kind of spin, is like a spin and whatever.
Right.
But the funny thing is, in the United States and in Western countries in general, you have like a majority of the people, or at least a large part of the population, actually literally believing, right? You have people who watch Fox News and believe that that's actually the truth, what they see there. So there's not that critical lens. Most people in the West, and particularly in the US, don't seem to have the critical lens to kind of actually see through propaganda the way that people who live in like these authoritarian regimes in the Eastern Bloc, that pretty much all of them, if they were somewhat literate, they got it, that they were exposed to propaganda, right? So that's kind of an interesting. So it also shows obviously how successful, like how professional propaganda is being done in the United States, that it actually works, And
you could correct me, because I'm not a historian. I'm just an independent researcher when it comes to this. Yellow journalism, I think, is born out of the Spanish-American War through Pulitzer. And then there's like a prize about winning the Pulitzer Prize. But I think wasn't he kind of like the originator of yellow journalism and propaganda for the Spanish-American War?
Partly, yeah. No, I mean there are of course several figures, and I think it's obviously the Western history of media history is very very complex. I don't think we can nail it down to necessarily one particular person,
Sure,
but
sure.
certainly like that Pulitzer. But and I also know there's a strong tradition of yellow press in the UK, right? That is I
Mm,
don't think was necessarily copied from, or maybe they did. I don't know. I have no idea where like the things like the Sun, the British Sun, which is like always have these those
right.
tabloids, those British tabloids. I don't know whether this was actually just there were some smart marketing people in London copying what already existed in the US, or whether
Right.
there's their own domestic development in the UK. I'm not sure. We have to ask media historians about that. But what I do know is there was an interesting, more on the theoretical level, and a name that you should look into is Barnes, right? Barn, I think EIS or EYS. I'm not sure.
Hmm.
So I forgot the first name, but he was actually he was the nephew of Sigmund Freud, right, of the famous psychiatrist. He was from the same. He was an Austrian, a Jewish Austrian, right, from that same. And he was also influenced by his uncle's, that kind of modern view of pretty modern ideas of psychology. And he is the one who is like he is considered the father of modern propaganda. Like he wrote like books about how you can like kind of essentially handbooks on how you do propaganda, like how you can tweak majorities, how you can essentially manufacture consent, all of these things. And he was so famous that actually Goebbels, like the Nazis, Goebbels tried to he said, okay, we can erase your Jewishness, we can just make you an honorary Aryan and join us, we pay you like millions. But then he refused. He refused and then put his services at the display of at the disposition of the American government instead to do their propaganda during World War II particularly. And which obviously is not. If you look at the two ideologies, right? You look at
Sure.
Western liberalism and Nazism. I mean, I still would agree that putting propaganda at the disposition of Western liberalism, as much as it was also imperialist, is still better than having that if that would have been put into the service of Nazism, right? With its genocidal white supremacy to the extreme.
Right.
So in that sense, I'm kind of glad that he choose the American employers over the Nazi
Hmm.
employers. But at the same time, there is a lot of that spin, like the way how you spin, how you manufacture consent, all of that. So he essentially worked for like the military industrial complex, CIA, like all of that. They pretty much took most of their ideas from him. So that's really
Interesting.
somebody to look into.
Well, if you're a young Pacific scholar, if you want to write a dissertation on how his psychological warfare affected the Hawaiian
Yeah.
psyche, that could be a whole dissertation too. Um, Now, I know I usually call you around La Hoiho'ea or La Ku'okoa to just learn
Mhm.
like one interesting fact. And I know La Hoiho'ea is coming up. Big shout out again to Chief of War for releasing I think that flew under the radar for a lot of people that Chief of
Mhm.
War actually released not on Jason Momoa's birthday, which was the Friday, August
Mhm.
1st, but July 31st on La Hoiho'ea. Um, but what's something that you could share with us that was really exciting to learn about the Hawaiian Kingdom?
Well, I mean, I think let's first, I guess, I should first want to chime in what you just said. I mean, I just want a big shout out here to Jason Momoa. I never met him personally. One of my friends did, but I think like he's really great, and he's like, he's like the first Hawaiian Kanaka Maoli or Kanaka Oiwi Hollywood actor who is actually like, really, really standing up for Hawaii.
Mm,
In the
yeah,
beyond just his career. You know what I mean? And I
right.
mean, I'm not saying that the other two big Hollywood actors with Hawaii connections, right, The Rock and Keanu Reeves, they have done. I mean, they're great actors too, and they have done some, I think some good work to raise awareness of like Pacific Islanders and Hawaiians in wider American society. But they have unfortunately shied away from making strong stance about Hawaii and Hawaiian issues and seem to be more concerned with their Hollywood careers as opposed to Jason, who has really like stepped out of the way, right? He even postponed the filming of Aquaman 2 to be on the Mauna, right? Those kind of things that really need like a lot of appreciation, and the way that he has now used some of his money together with those two Maori to buy that film studio in Aotearoa, so that now they have like a kind of a Pacific Pacific Islander-owned film company that could, I mean, I can only imagine what brilliant films are going to come out of that in the next couple of decades, So really big shout out to Jason. I really like him, and I really like his commitment to to Hawaii, like the way that no other one has done so far.
Well, I don't know if this could inspire, because I know Thomas Sibbett, I believe they're cousins, the one who wrote Aquaman, and he kind of got Jason Momoa into acting. And I had made a post, and I said, if you're talking about King Kamehameha, because I'm learning all this stuff, right? Like, oh, he's our founding father. I'm kind of like trying to think of Hawaiian history in the terms of aloha aina, right? Like being a Hawaiian patriot. And it's not what I can do, my country can do for me, it was what I can do for my country kind of thing. So I use social media to kind of be a little loud, right? Because I feel like the propaganda, to your point, has been so heavy that I kind of use my Facebook feed as anti-propaganda. I make a propaganda myself and like little logos and whatever I can to kind of push Hawaiian national consciousness into understanding, like you were an occupied country and what that means and all that. But out of all the stories in the world, like if Jason Momoa is listening or Thomas Sibbett, who wrote Aquaman and encouraged him to act, if you could name...
honestly, I would like just to add one more, because he maybe not as at
the
same level.
Jason Scott.
The other Jason. Jason has done a lot of good work.
Oh too. Yeah. And Jason Scott Lee, huge shout out to him, because I believe he opened up
absolutely.
There was it was like an educational panel, and he says, my name is Jason Scott Lee and I'm an actor. And then basically he says, I didn't know about my country,
of course,
like my great-great-grandparents, but they did, and here's what I learned. So and Wind and a Reckoning was an incredible film. Actually, my best friend Brian Watai Galleries is an artist. He's really good friends with Na'awao, who coached Jason Scott Lee in the Olelo Hawaii for the film. And I had dinner with them last month, which was really cool. And it's just interesting to see these stories. But if you could name like either a historical event, 3 historical events, or you can mix a historical event with like a person in Hawaiian history that should have a film to learn more about Hawaii, what do you feel like that would be? Like, if you just off the top of your head, what 3 figures?
Oh, absolutely. I have one that, because I'm currently writing his biography, which has been delayed over many. It probably takes still a while, but I've been working on that for like almost 10 years now.
Sure.
Henry Poor. He would be like like a fascinating character, and he should have definitely a movie. If somebody has the money, making a movie about him would be like amazing.
Who is Henry Poor?
Henry Poor, exactly. That's the point. No, very
that's
few
the point.
Know about him. Yeah, exactly.
So
that's why I want to. Just like Charles and Julian is an interesting
Julian.
character.
Like you don't. I
would make a movie about him too.
Okay.
But then again, because he's not an indigenous Pacific Islander. Maybe that's less tempting these days. But Henry Poor, who actually is like ethnically Hawaiian, he's Hapa. And he was born in Honolulu in the 1850s, and he was probably one of the 5 or 6 Hawaiians who were career diplomats. Maybe Ha'alilio is another one. Ha'alilio is obviously the first. Maybe somebody put a movie about him.
Oh, yeah. I think there's an opera. Umi was saying they made an opera.
Oh, sure. Yeah, sure. There's already. So I think also thanks to particularly the work of Kauai Sai, who needs
Kauai Sai, hats off to Kauai.
Particularly because of her work. Of course, also Keanu, but like let's not talk about Keanu all the time. Talk about some other people.
Right.
So because of Kauai, I think Kauai has been particularly strong in advocating for Ha'alilio. So I think the way that Ha'alilio is now really famous in the Hawaiian community is particularly thanks to Kauai's efforts, I would say, to more than anybody else. So of course, also
Ha'alilio definitely needs a future.
But Ha'alilio is definitely, but I do think also that he has already the good thing is that he has already like even his icon, right? Like they got like people like doing that. There's now these graffiti kind of paint, print things, and people don't even put the name on. Like it's just the face.
It's just the face. They kind of know.
Yeah, but it's now already well. So that's a good thing because it shows Ha'alilio has become part of Hawaiian pop culture, so to say, and that's great. So that is already
fantastic.
That has already been. So he, in a way, I would say I still it's great to have a movie about him, but he needs less exposure because he's already well exposed through some of the Native Hawaiian student services. Big shout out to Willie and Nalani too, because they have also done that promotion, particularly this kind of pop icon of Ha'alilio that the Native Hawaiian student services has done a lot for that as well. But let's go back to Henry Poor, who is really like my favorite, obviously my own because I'm writing his biography. So Henry Poor was a like I said, he grew up in urban Honolulu, Hapa, speaking probably more comfortably in English, but also speaking Olelo fluently, like obviously being fluent in both. Now he went on. Now why he's so interesting is because he went on he's the only Hawaiian diplomat who went on those two kind of capital moments of Hawaiian diplomacy under King Kalākaua. The first one is he went with Curtis Iokea around the world in that big trip that was kind of the follow-up after Kalākaua's trip of the road, right? They had 2 years later, they had Curtis Iokea and Henry Poor doing this kind of follow-up diplomatic mission where they went to essentially all the countries that Kalākaua had visited plus others that Kalākaua missed. Right, so they went for the coronation of Tsar Alexander III in Russia. That was kind of, I guess, the main goal in a way. That was the kind of timely set goal. But then on the way to Moscow, they went around the entire world and kind of followed up with all the places that Kalākaua had been before, plus a few more. Right, so that was there. So he and for that trip. Now the interesting thing is, unlike Iokea, who has just like his diaries are just very like kind of, here on this day we did that, and we like Iokea's thing are more matter of the fact, short kind of diary entries, and Niklaus Schweitzer has already helped in like editing this, right? That it was already published like years ago. That around the what's it called by Royal Command, I think that that book that has Curtis Iokea's manuscript. But it's relatively short. It doesn't really provide as much deep kind of insights. I mean, it's great that it's out there, no question. Sure. But whereas Henry Poor did, he did private correspondence to his mother, and then his mother published all of these. They were simultaneously published in the like very briefly after they arrived in the actually in the English language press. They were not published in Olelo. Most of them. Some of them were also published later in translation in the Olelo Hawaii press. But these reports under the title A Hawaiians, I think was it called A Hawaiians Views Abroad or A Hawaiians Impressions Abroad, and that one was published in the PCA, in the Pacific Commercial Advertiser, which also some people don't understand the Pacific Commercial Advertiser because they always think at the time of the overthrow when it was Lauren Thurston's mouthpiece and spewing all this pro-American propaganda, which then stayed from that onward, right? But that was only after Lauren Thurston bought it, right? Because it was from 1888 onwards. Before that, it was actually before 1888, it was actually it was a patriotic Hawaiian newspaper that was like the mouthpiece of King Kalākaua's government, and it had a lot of very interesting intellectual conversations that were like pro-Hawaiian. Amazing stuff is in that newspaper during that period, during Kalākaua's reign, prior to the bayonet coup. And so during this 1883 trip around the world, Henry Poor publishes like all his impressions. How is these mountains in Sri Lanka, in Ceylon, they remind me of the Ko'olaus. Oh, I miss home, like those kind of things, But so it's very interesting. And then, but then here comes the interesting twist. I don't fully like, what makes him so interesting that he is also a complex character. I would not agree with 100% of what he writes, because he is also like being Hapa and actually being so Hapa that he could essentially pass as white. He also, he mainly associates with British colonials in most of those places that he goes to. And then he also has sometimes very bad things to say about the native people of those places. Like he talks about the Indians in India being dirty and like people that are like, and, kind of commands the British for like, the British need to like keep them together because these people cannot rule themselves. And so he repeats kind of the British colonial discourse, unfortunately. And then he goes later, and he comes back to Hawaii. He has a famous beach house in Waikiki, where Robert Louis Stevenson stays, and there's Robert Louis Stevenson. In Robert Louis Stevenson's writing, Henry Poor figures a lot because he's the one who hired that cottage for him and all of that. So, but then he goes on a second trip in 1887, namely with that, and that's how I came across him in the first place, because he was also the secretary to John Bush's mission to Samoa, to bring that Polynesian Confederation, to bring that to life, right, during in 1887. And so he was in Samoa, and he also reports and he writes a lot of details about Samoa back to Honolulu. Also, sometimes kind of unfortunately, sometimes also looking down at the Samoans from a very arrogant kind of Hawaiian point of view, like we are better than you guys, kind of in that sense. Although he also says stuff like the Samoan language is more beautiful than the Hawaiian one. That's interesting. That he says that, even though otherwise he kind of criticizes them.
Okay.
So
kind of complicated,
it's an interesting and complicated character. But then what makes him so now, but where the twist really comes that makes me still love him absolutely, despite all of this. I mean, I still don't love those writings, obviously, but and those particular quotes, obviously, I don't like them. I would never love those kind of things. Okay. But yeah, sure. Sorry, I'm coming.
No, it's okay. Go ahead. No.
But with that kind of mindset, you would expect that he would be one of those few hapa siding with Thurston, right, against these we have a few hapas, right, like some of these Queen King's ministers too, who were not clear, right, who were essentially betraying her and stuff like that. And now he comes a real test of his loyalty, and guess where his loyalty is? His loyalty, when this comes, 1893 comes, he's like 100% loyal to the kingdom. He actually participates in the 1895 Civil War alongside Winnie Wilcox, and then he gets imprisoned. He gets probably tortured. It's not clear, but he probably, like some other people, right? We have reports of people being actually tortured in the San Francisco Call, right? So there were people actually tortured by the Republic government, and then he was probably at least either tortured or he was just in such horrible sanitary conditions that he definitely died from the long-term effects of that imprisonment. Like he dies from it, shortly after. And he passes. And now comes the interesting thing about and then he passes away. And like hold your breath, he passes away on Laku Okoa, 1899.
No, come on.
Yes.
Come on. You can't make this up.
Yeah. I know, right?
That's why I love you. You're amazing. Now, in closing, so just one more factoid. So Thomas Sibbett, there you go. Go write something about Henry Pua, because if that doesn't awake the Hawaiian Kingdom, I don't know what wouldn't. If there's just one historical fact about Hawaii's place in Oceania that you just wish every Pacific Islander would know, Tongan, Samoan, Aotearoan, from Rapa Nui, like what do you feel would be that fact?
Well, I mean, the fact that Hawaii is an Oceanian country like them all, and it was the first non-Western country to achieve highest level international recognition, which Japan only achieved like 50 years later, right? So I think that's really a fact that I think everybody should know, that it was one of their Oceanian brother nations that was the first to have achieved full recognition in 1843.
Do you feel like that recognition helped Japan as well as their countries become independent?
Well, I mean, it did. Well, and then it did help, obviously, to become it was the template for Tonga's constitution. So, like with with all these differences that I just mentioned before, without that template, Tonga may not be what it is today. So definitely, like, the way that Tonga could navigate its independence and its at least very, very low level of colonial infringement that it had with this British protection, so-called protection. Certainly, like that Hawaiian, having copied that Hawaiian constitution or like parts of it has certainly helped Tonga. I think in that sense, there's a lasting effect there. And yeah, I mean, I think it helped other non-Western countries, particularly Asian countries, it literally helped Japan to get rid of the unequal treaties, right? That was part of the Hawaiian Kingdom being in that quote unquote first tier of nations under this 19th century system, where Hawaiian Kingdom itself had an unequal treaty, an unequal treaty oppressing Japan, right? So the Hawaiian Kingdom had, like, Hawaiians had the same privileges that British and Americans had in Japan. Like, they could commit a crime in Japan and not be charged by the Japanese, not even be arrested by the Japanese police, right? They had those same unequal treaty rights that Western powers had in Japan. Mm-hmm. And Hawaii gave that up voluntarily, and therefore created the precedent that forced the actual big Western powers then to also reverse their unequal treaties and give Japan that full level of sovereignty that in 1899. So that was the result of the Hawaiian Kingdom reversing its unequal treaties with Japan. So yes.
Wow. I mean, my eyes are just out of my head. So for my viewers that have learned something new about Hawaii that you might have not known, hats off to Lorenz Gonschor, Dr. Gonschor. I'm going to go ahead and provide all the links to A Power in Oceania. Encourage any of your articles that are coming out. If you publish anything new, reach out to me. I'll include it as a link in the description to this YouTube podcast. I really want to encourage the work of Dr. Lorenz and just mahalo him for his time today with us. I've learned a lot. I'm over the years from Dr. Gonschor, and I just have to say mahalo nui loa with all my pu'uwai for everything that you do for the Hawaiian Kingdom. Mahalo. Well, until we see each other again, hui ho. And I hope you guys enjoyed this third episode of the Hawaiian Kingdom podcast. Stay tuned for more. Aloha.
Evelina mai kako, and welcome to the Hawaiian Kingdom podcast. Evelina mai kako, and welcome to